A tremendous act of trust takes place in the middle of an untamed wilderness where nature rules supremely and is strong protective. The boundary between the wilderness and humanity is blurred when a mother wolf makes an unthinkable choice. Civilization. She gives a lone man custody of her priceless cub. Might persuade a wild creature to trust a human. And how would this improbable bond change both there? Resides deep inside the North's old, expansive forests, where the fresh air and sound of the leaves rustling convey the tales from years ago. A dramatic scene is set amidst tall pines, and a mother wolf, majestic, walks silently across muted clearings, fierce and sensitive. The bush with her baby cub, her eyes shining with an unexplainable sadness and an innate fierceness. Examine the untamed terrain, as though seeking something outside the forest's boundaries one fateful night as the mother wolf stopped close to a tree as the twilight softened the rocky tree outlines and a delicate mist rose. Leaning on an old wooden fence at the edge of a worn logging trail that sliced through the woods. Habitation, a lone man stood. He was tough, and had gentle eyes that had witnessed both suffering and optimism. He passed his days exploring the forest's edge, tending to a small hut and taking care of. Like him, wandering animals had ended out on the periphery of society in that tense instant when the wolf's eyes locked with his, a silent exchange that defied. She spoke without holding back and moved on with elegant yet. The mother wolf approached the man in a strange and heart-stopping incident, seemingly guided by. When an ancient wisdom softly guided her youngster toward him, the man crouched down, surprised but somehow understanding. He made an unconscious vow while holding the frail creature in his arms. Between them, Evelyn saw that their destinies were interwoven. Later on, the lady who had inherited the man's empathy and enthusiasm for the outdoors would describe this remarkable experience as a pivotal moment, describing how the man, a quiet soul who frequently gets lost in concentration, observed instead of being a dangerous wild animal, cub is a beacon of hope and a living example of the conviction that there may be a deep bond between humanity and nature. The mother wolf's act was not one of desertion, but of faith, a last-ditch appeal for her children to have a future in a realm where, as darkness grew deeper and the forest grew more dense, the lines separating the wild from civilization were always changing, revealed its secrets, a scene that was recorded in the history of local law as a time when compassion and fate combined, came together in the depths of the ancient forest in a single, unforgettable deed, where the ground was soft with moss and fallen needles, and the towering pines whispered mysteries from centuries ago. The rustle of leaves and the distant cry of the wild filled the crisp, chilly air as it held its breath. As birds settled into the twilight, a strong, timeless force and mysterious story started to develop, a drama that would profoundly alter the lives of both men and wolves. A gorgeous mother wolf was the subject of this tale. Her fur was a tapestry of grays and silvers that glistened in the failing light. Her deep, knowing eyes revealed a fierce protectiveness as well as clutching her newborn cub close to her side, she traveled with a profound sadness that no wild creature should experience. Moving stealthily through the woodland, led by an instinct that is ancient than time. With its thick forest and meandering paths, it functioned as a labyrinth and a haven where people could survive. Required bravery, discernment, and occasionally an act of unanticipated faith along a narrow. The mother wolf stopped along a logging trail that wound around the boundary of human habitation. Amid the interaction of, she felt a strange presence in the shadows and waning light that did. Leaning against an old wooden fence, a man whose peaceful form seemed to not belong only to the wilderness, blend in with the surroundings. He had rough features, yet the soft wrinkles on his face conveyed that he had spent many days outside, nights of solitude in the sky in a small hut among the forests. He had seen the EB and the wild river, and his eyes were warm and alert. And while the man stood there, he exuded a sense of silent wisdom that spoke to the untamed spirit of nature. In that rare moment, the mother wolf, lost in his own thoughts, came gracefully and determinedly. Then, The wolf's eyes met his, and the human and wild worlds met in a wordless communication. A single word exchanged between them, a language more ancient than speech and based on instinct and. The wolf softly prodded her cub forward out of empathy, perhaps saying, "This tiny one is intended for you." Startled but captivated by the depth of her stare, the man carefully knelt and stretched his. At first, his touch was hesitant, as though he was testing the brittle relationship that, when the cub softly and tremblingly sank into his arms, two worlds were so desperate. It seemed as though destiny had completed weaving its elaborate tapestry, which linked the untamed spirit to the. In the days that followed, the man whose name was eventually revealed to be Jonah found himself in the heart of a lone human. Jonah had spent a considerable amount of time on the periphery of civilization, seeking comfort in the. Despite the forest's calm and his cabin's modest living conditions, that night had sparked an emotional outburst and a sense of accountability in him that went beyond the. He started looking for purpose in his lonely life after performing the modest act of sheltering an animal, believing that maybe the cab was a live representation of hope, with its gentle eyes and delicate physique, meant to rebuild a relationship he had long since lost. But the newfound bond wasn't without difficulties, as Jonah held. The cub struggled with mixed feelings and doubts about how a wild animal might fit in with humanity. An intense desire to find redemption for his own loneliness and remorse for disturbing nature's delicate order. On other nights, as the wind howled through the forest, it also seemed to be warning. The weathered porch of the cottage was covered in eerie shadows from the trees and the full moon, and Jonah would wonder whether the mother wolf's gift was both a challenge and an invitation to accept a destiny that he wasn't entirely certain he could achieve. Whispers of the local hunters and woodsmen started talking about weird encounters. Some even claimed to have seen the wolf. Her eyes were filled with an unsaid request for others as she strolled by Jonah's cabin. Bond, who was doubtful of the supernatural, muttered that maybe the wolf was only motivated by instinct or hunger. Jonah had vivid memories of that night, when the wild had given him a piece of its soul's tranquility. Jonah was humbled and resolved to uphold that trust as he adapted to. He also had practical difficulties in his life with the cub, because the small animal was not like a tame pet. With untamed instincts and wants derived from the untamed forest, it developed into a. Jonah desired a meticulous routine that included both sustenance and connectedness with nature. Advice from regional animal rehabilitation specialists. However, experts cautioned him about the challenges of raising a savage animal. He was driven to keep going each day as he entered. He took the cub with him while he went hunting and foraging in the wild, teaching it how to do both in his own kind manner. The natural and human realms in his silent moments by the fire, Jonah considered the amazing and peculiar. His relationship with the wolf the cub brought back memories of the tales his grandmother had told him. Tales about animals that sent messages of hope and of the untamed spirits of the forest. Nevertheless, Jonah believed that his own destiny was set in stone as he stood at the entrance to that ancient legacy, connected to the cubs and, thus, to the enigmatic mother wolf who had initiated everything. As autumn deepened and the first signs of winter appeared on the forest margins, Jonah set off on a quest not to be missed, not just to take care of the cub, but also to find a forgotten aspect of himself in each. The pathways of the wild and human fate have intersected, offering opportunities for trials, revelations, and, in the weeks after that fateful encounter, there may have been a resurgence of the timeless strength of compassion and trust in the. Jonah's life was changed in the forest, but not without some internal conflict. Jonah discovered a tapestry of russet and gold as the colors of the woodland changed from vivid greens to a deeper shade of autumn. Despite loving the unexpected bond, he found it difficult to care for the cub and navigate a completely new world. Because a ferocious creature gradually emerged, and each day Jonah balanced his routine of taking care of his small cottage and hunting in the woods while juggling the increasing obligations of rearing the cub. The small one occasionally displayed restless outbursts of energy that revealed its innate wildness, in contrast to a domesticated pet. For hours, The cub would disappear into the nearby woods before emerging with a ferocious sparkle in its eyes. Had filled Jonah's heart with pride and anxiety. It seems like a piece of it still belongs to the woodland he frequently visits. Pondered, finding it difficult to balance his wish to raise it with the knowledge that it was not intended to be. Restricted to human life, as the days stretched into weeks, Jonah looked to local specialists in animal behavior and wildlife rehabilitation at a small conservation. He met Dr. Elena Morales, a wildlife specialist, at the center on the forest border. Candid behavior at a sunlit office with pictures of the wilderness doctor while sipping steaming herbal tea. Wild animals, particularly those raised in the wild, have impulses that cannot be controlled, according to Morales. Even if the behavior of your fully tamed cub seems strange to a human, it is typical for a creature of its heritage, creating an atmosphere that permits it to exhibit its untamed nature while simultaneously getting the. Her remarks about carrot needs struck a deep chord with Jonah, but they also made him face a difficult reality. While attempting to provide the cub with a safe home, he was discovered. The comforts of human society and the freedom of the wild coexist in two different universes. Meanwhile, Jonah was resting LED with these opposing urges when an unannounced guest caused more issues. On his way back from a regular forest excursion late one clear evening, Jonah came across a familiar shape. The mother wolf was a sinuous, dark apparition among the trees that moved with effortless ferocity. Time appeared to slow down for a second as the wolf's piercing gaze met the two locked eyes. Spoke of mother love and a secret request in that voice, filled with a calm grief. Brief encounter, Jonah felt that the wolf and her cub's relationship was still there, but it was only a thread. The wolf hovered at the edge of the clearing for a moment, bridging the gap between the wild past and the unsure present. The mother vanished into the thick foliage, leaving Jonah with more questions than answers. Was the wolf just quietly keeping watch over her baby, or was she coming back to retrieve it? The wolf encounter tormented Jonah for the next few days, telling him to respect its true nature. Every rustle, every distant scream in the brush reminded him of the wild legacy he had unconsciously come to terms with, and he started to record these events in a tattered leather journal, expressing his inner turmoil. One evening, he wrote, "I feel torn. I want to protect my child when the rain battered his cabin's roof, but I know it belongs in the wild, so how can I be both its guardian and its prisoner?" These contemplations helped him better grasp his own loneliness, life on the periphery of nature and human culture, as well as the desire for connection that drew him in. Inexplicably, the community whispers about that fateful encounter at the same time. As word of Jonah's extraordinary circumstances spread, some locals were astounded by the tale of a guy who had won the trust of a wild wolf's offspring, while others questioned his capacity to provide. One evening at a modest event hosted by a local conservation group, a truly wild animal. "Do you really think it's appropriate for you to keep this cub with you? Isn't it supposed to be free?" said a neighbor. Although the inquiry hurt, it also made Jonah explain his own internal justification. "Feel that our fates are intertwined," he quietly responded. "I'm not taking away this little life by taking care of it. The outdoors, but maybe restoring something inside of me that has long been gone." As the cub became more active, words full of hope, vulnerability departed the room in thoughtful stillness. As its untamed inclinations became more apparent, it occasionally dashed through the forest in fits of uncontrollable vigor, only to come back reminding everyone that its heart was still beating with an almost defiant expression. As Jonah observed these periods in time with the wilderness, he felt both amazed and a constant melancholy. He planned little outings where he would go into the woods with the cub. During these excursions, he allowed it to wander under his careful observation and realized that his role was not only tame the cub, but also serve as a link between its wild spirit and the precarious security of his surroundings. As the internal battle intensified daily, starker Jonah came to the realization that he ran the risk of depriving the cub of its actual essence in a heartbreaking way the more he attempted to protect it from the wild. Jonah was alone by a dying fire one evening after the cub had slipped away into the wilderness for hours. With tears silently flowing down his cheeks, he muttered, I want to keep you safe, into the dark, but I'm afraid I'm trapping your spirit there." This inner monologue tormented him, motivating him to look for a fine balance in this crucible of opposing ideals between love and reverence for the laws of nature. Feelings. Jonah decided that respecting the cub's natural wildness was essential to its destiny and possibly to his own salvation. He started looking into ways to establish a semi-wild sanctuary next to his cabin where the cub could run about unhindered. Despite the risk and administrative difficulties, this choice allowed for continued care and protection. He felt a feeling of purpose from his increased seclusion from his human neighbors. It was a daring step toward bringing together the disparate aspects of his identity: the lonely man yearning for companionship and the silent protector of the wilderness. As autumn gave way to the first winter whispers, Jonah's battle to raise the cub turned into a metaphor for his own path to recovery and self-awareness, where every day presented fresh obstacles as well as minor triumphs. A moment of silent comprehension between him and the cub, a shared smile with a neighbor, and a recurrent picture of the together. These encounters and Mother Wolf's vigilant gaze in the forest created a tenuous connection that crossed the lines between the natural and human worlds, entwining their fates in ways neither could have predicted when Jonah and the cub became accustomed to their new, hesitant routine. The forest itself appeared to be whispering secrets that suggested a destiny that went well beyond just surviving in the silence. When everything was covered in mist, and the only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and Jonah started to notice small changes surrounding his cabin after hearing the distant call of an owl. Initially, it was the way the wind produced a unique, almost melodic howl. That wasn't the typical cry of the wild, but one evening while he was sitting by the fire with the cub close by, he noticed something in the soft earth that left a sequence of terrible prints that chilled his blood, dotted with distinct human footprints that led from the forest's edge to his porch. Peaked. Jonah, uneasy, followed the track, and the following morning the prints wandered along a small, secret trail far into the forest until suddenly vanishing at the base of an old oak tree, its enormous trunk battered by decades of storms. A symbol he recognized from his grandmother's ancient, half-forgotten stories was carved into the rough bark. Time revealed to him a wolf's paw interwoven with a crescent moon. The finding sent a shiver down his spine. Was this a mark made by the mother wolf, or was it an indication of something older? Long before he even entered the woodland that night, his fate was predetermined as the silver light of. As the landscape was illuminated by the full moon, Jonah had an epiphany that would alter everything. The cub, who had been substantially more animated in the previous weeks, started displaying odd habits, and captivating as they hunted together. The small animal would stop at specific locations and incline its head as though hearing sounds in the distance before mysteriously darting off into the night and coming back with a tiny. Jonah smoothed the stone in its mouth that glinted in the moonlight with an odd iridescence, picked up one of these stones and turned it over in his hands. The same crescent was faintly engraved on the stone surface. Jonah discovered that these stones started to show up in unexpected ways over the course of the days after seeing the poor symbol on the tree. Locations near the cabin and along the forest trail by the river's edge. He told Doctor that each stone had the same enigmatic symbol, and he couldn't ignore these indications as coincidences. He had previously met Elena Moore, a wildlife rehabilitator, on a peaceful evening in her small office. She listened carefully to his story before whispering, "Jonah, occasionally, nature provides us with clues that serve as doorways to a more profound comprehension of our relationship with it. Is old and connected to a story about a wolf spirit that chooses a human guardian when a natural equilibrium is." Her words in peril resonated in Jonah's head, and he remembered tidbits of his grandmother used to tell him stories about a mysterious connection between people and the fireside. Wild, where a selected person would be given a wolf's cub to bring harmony back when the natural world screamed, requesting assistance. Is it possible that his meeting with the mother wolf was a calling rather than just a coincidence? The wolf's intentional gesture of tenderly surrendering her young to him was an indication that their fates were aligned, were linked together for a greater good. And the twist grew even deeper one foggy morning as the Cub saw a figure standing quietly on the edge of the river. It was covered in shadow, but when he slowly moved closer, the stranger entered the gentle morning light. She was an old woman with eyes that. Her voice was calm and resonant as she said, "You have been chosen." She shone with an almost supernatural awareness. "It is not coincidental between you and the cub. Long ago, our forefathers thought that when nature is in, the wolf spirit in distress discovers a human soul that is pure enough to restore equilibrium. The sacred connection in your life is marked by the symbol you saw. Because Cub's life and this forest destiny are intertwined, Jonah's heart raced with a mixture of wonder and fearfully, the woman went on, "I have been sent to assist you realize that you are not only. You are a guardian and a link between the human and natural worlds when you take care of a mother wolf." Handed her cub to you after sensing that the moment had come for you to accept your ripped destiny. Jonah found it difficult to comprehend this revelation as he wavered between incredulity and a deep, stirring realization in his soul. Magical symbols, the cub's strange behavior, and, more recently, the interaction with the mysterious woman came together to reveal a single, fate-changing fact, was much larger than he had ever thought, entwined with that of the wolf and the forest. Jonah experienced an overpowering rush as he stood beside the river, the water glistening in the early morning light, of accountability and a profoundly felt hope that he would indeed be the protector the old story spoke of. Predicted that in the days that followed Jonah's mystical meeting with the mysterious woman by the river, he would find himself float in a sea of opposing feelings after learning that the mother wolf's act played a part in an old, nearly doomed bond story that connected his fate to the wild had left him feeling terribly uneasy and shocked each time he closed his eyes. The gleam of those enigmatic stones, the gentle knowledge, and pictures of the crescent moon twined with the wolf's paw. He felt as though the forest had selected him for a purpose far beyond his basic needs as the old woman's stare filled his head. Lonely life on a cold morning when the woodland was still covered with early fog. Jonah sat on his cabin's rickety porch with the cub curled up at his feet. The small animal was playful yet, gently pulled at his pant leg with caution, as though he should go back into the trees. Jonah started talking out loud in the silence, not knowing if he was addressing the cub or the silent forest in general. "Am I to do now?" he whispered, his voice full of doubt. "Am I the guardian they say I must be, or am I just a man whose internal forces are overpowered by fate?" Every inquiry reverberated in the silence of the morning on the same day that Jonah was born, demonstrating the unadulterated and tangible suffering. Requested the advice of Dr. Elena Morales, a wildlife rehabilitation specialist who had previously given him advice on comprehending the cub's actions in her small office, which is filled with old pictures of the wilderness and bookcases brimming with natural law volumes. He described in detail the revelations I witnessed the night before, symbol etched on the oak, the enigmatic stones, and then the woman said, "I was selected." He then revealed his. Dr. Morales listened carefully as her eyes narrowed in contemplation and her voice wavered between amazement and fear. "Sometimes nature speaks to us in ways that defy logic," Jonah added quietly. "Old stories describe a time when wolves and people were entangled, their tie healing the land." Even while her remarks offered some consolation, it's possible that what you went through was a contemporary echo of that old relationship. They also exacerbated his inner turmoil. Was he really intended to unite the wild and the civilized? Or was this merely a lovely, unexplainable coincidence over the course of the following few days? Jonah's hut turned into a place of reflection, and he began writing down his experiences in a worn leather. Writing in a journal, every sign and every seeming whisper of the wind. Filled with significance at these intimate moments, he struggled to reconcile the conflict between his identity and hardy lonesome man who had always sought safety in the woods with a newly acquired duty that now. He wrote one night, stopping to beckon him, "I feel both chosen and chained. If I accept this destiny, I will be able to erase the tears that had distorted the ink on the paper. Will I eventually discover the purpose I've been lacking? Or will I lose the freedom that has always characterized me?" Over time, Rumors of his supernatural experience started to discreetly spread among the few residents who still wander around the edge of the forest. There were rumors that Jonah's cabin was turning into a haven for traditionalists, a place where the spirit of the wild continued to influence a limited number of others who had similar beliefs. He began receiving visits from a retired park ranger and a recluse naturalist. Attracted by the prospect that the age-old connection between humans and wolves actually existed, they interacted with him in long, passionate conversations over the wolf spirit's legends and the notion of a protector appointed to bring about equilibrium. As they sat around a roaring fire one evening, the former ranger remarked, "When nature was in distress for your story, fire makes me think of the old stories. Maybe you're not traveling alone, Jonah. His words are rich in lore, and perhaps there's a network of human and wild souls waiting for a sign." Of the land struck a profound chord with Jonah despite their addition of layers of mysticism to his already nuanced feelings, but not every reaction was astonished by. When local conservationists held a small community gathering, a skeptic voice questioned the developing narrative claiming that you were chosen by fate and that a wolf gave you its pup, as though you were a magical guardian. The middle-aged man's tone was harsh, raising doubts about the feasibility of such an ethereal bond. Jonah found it difficult to respond, feeling the weight of every gaze and every questioning murmur. I only know that something amazing happened because he acknowledged that he didn't have all the answers and that his voice was low and sensitive. Occurred, and I now have to learn to accept it no matter what. His candid acknowledgement isn't totally satisfactory, though. Others who had also experienced the stirrings of the incomprehensible in their hearts gave him nods of admiration in response to his critics. Jonah gradually started to adapt to a season of transition as the weeks passed. He continued to tenderly care for the cub during this dual existence, let it to roam freely under close supervision. Trips into the forest, he experienced a deep sense of connectedness to both the natural world and himself. The cub's elegant leaps in the dappled sunlight and joyful barks were a continual reminder that life in all its every day turned into a lesson in wild unpredictability, which was a gift to be treasured. Striking a balance between nature's uncompromising independence and the occasionally painful beauty of interpersonal relationships in the peaceful seclusion of his hut, encircled by the forest's whispers. Given the reverberation of old stories, Jonah started to accept the idea that his destiny and the cub's were linked. With a broader goal in mind, he decided to uphold the confidence the mother wolf had given him by attempting to care for the cub, but it was decided to preserve the fragile equilibrium between the human and wild worlds. Would determine his future and possibly the forest's future as the days turned into weeks following the supernatural experience. Jonah's newly discovered responsibility as the cub's protector grew more. What was once a single, nearly mystical relationship has now become convoluted. Layers of difficulties that weighed heavily on his mind and threatened to upset his peaceful existence. Jonah quickly discovered that there were unforeseen obstacles associated with fate's demands, one of which was the most immediate. Difficulties emerged when local government representatives and wildlife specialists started taking awareness of the peculiar situation involving the cub's visit to Jonah's hut. Reports have selected a team of conservation officers known as the Guardian in the Forest has gradually spread among the local park rangers and logging crews. Bond, intrigued by the rumors of a human wolf, paid Jonah a covert visit. There have been rumors of a remarkable friendship here, and one officer said in a tone that was a mix of, despite the fact that their questions were Jonah felt the strain of public scrutiny, attention, and the potential for his personal journey to soon come under the scrutiny of media and scientists. Word of Jonah's magical experience started to spread among nearby settlements at the same time, in a small group. Jonah had found a crescent moon entwined, an old emblem that captivated naturalists and folklorists. Began collecting information with a wolf's paw in order to bolster the story of the wolf spirit. They went to the cabin. They silently followed him on his forays into the forest, although others perceived their presence as confirmation of the mysterious. Jonah became more and more overwhelmed by the interference with the equilibrium between Maintaining the cub's privacy and allowing him to act naturally became a cause of internal turmoil that I never. In the solitude of his cabin, he would whisper to himself, his heart heavy with the understanding that he had been asked to become a legend. That, in the meantime, his destiny was attracting unwelcome attention in the tight-knit neighborhood next to the forest's edge. An unforeseen conflict started to arise between Jonah's neighbors, some of whom were deeply rooted in local customs, and the notion that Jonah was selected to bring nature back into balance was accepted by legend. Others rallied around him with sincere support, although they remained doubtful of what was happening, as nothing more than superstition and a diversion from more pragmatic issues like safety and local economic development. One evening at a neighborhood gathering, a heated debate broke out when an elderly man questioned if we should think that if a wolf somehow gave its cub to a man, isn't it more possible that you're just pursuing old legends? The argument highlighted the split in the town, giving Jonah's story a more nuanced social dimension. Personal journey. In addition to these outside influences, Jonah's personal life became more complex. Every day, the cub struggled to balance his untamed instincts with the demands of a human existence. With its natural energy spikes and unwillingness to stay in one place, it frequently went far into the forest, leaving. Jonah was torn between wanting to keep it safe and realizing that it belonged in the wild in the first place. Jonah sat at the brink of a brook on a particularly tearful afternoon after the cub had been gone for hours, asking, "Am I holding it back?" he asked out loud, balancing his protective tendencies with the cub's yearning for freedom, a voice breaking with doubt. Or, am I shielding it from a world that shouldn't be aware of this internal conflict? Increased his sense of loneliness as he battled the worry that by attempting to save the cub, he would be denying it its basic essence. The resurgence of old memories and unsolved regrets added to the chaos. Jonah started getting letters from an unknown writer in a hand he recognized that suggested a previous relationship between his family and the local legends of wolf guardians, as evidenced by a faded letter found in. According to an old journal, his forefathers were formerly thought to as wild keepers, with a heritage rich in. This revelation soothed both legend and an enigmatic covenant with nature, and tortured him since it implied that his present course might be predetermined, but also burdened him with expectations that he wasn't certain he could meet in the face of these mounting difficulties. When a nearby wildlife rehabilitation center indicated interest in researching the behavior of the cub, a new subplot developed. To see if the cub would adjust to a more regulated setting, they suggested an experimental program. Although the concept was embraced by the community as a means of protecting the animal and gaining scientific understanding. Jonah saw it as a danger to the cub's natural legacy. They wished to enclose what nature meant to be unrestricted, he vehemently asserted at His uncompromising position further polarized opinions in the community forum, with some praising his dedication to the wild, and others worrying that he might not make judgments that are best for the cubs because of his emotional affinity. The stray dog, the saga's catalyst, quietly persisted in its daily routine despite everything. Unaware of the chaos it had caused, the dog's trots past Jonah's cabin each time acted as a moving reminder of the delicately intertwined relationship between the natural and human realms. Even as Jonah struggled with uncertainties and anxieties in the quiet moments, its unwavering presence strengthened his resolve. Jonah would lie awake in his cabin before going to sleep, listening to the far-off noises of the forest blending with the echo of. He came to understand that his trip was about more than just taking care of a wild cub. It was about accepting a destiny that pushed him to become the link between two worlds every day, one that went beyond the norm. Every setback, encroachment, and veiled threat woven into the fabric of his battle pushed him to uphold the trust. It was placed in him by the mother wolf one cool evening as twilight turned into a cool, dark night in Jonah's world. Started change in unexpected ways, the soft harmony he had been gradually developing with the cub, and an unannounced guest abruptly interrupted his peaceful acceptance of his guardianship role as he sat by the orange glow of the tiniest burning fire outside his cabin danced against the darkening forest, a sharp, compelling. He was surprised by a knock at the door, and carefully opened it to discover a woman holding a clipboard and having determined eyes. She introduced herself as Rebecca Liu, a local Forest Service conservation worker, and shared the news that Jonah's heart started racing right away, and Rebecca started speaking in a low, frantic voice. "We recently learned that a logging firm has been given permission to cut a sizable portion of the forest close to your cabin. Key habitats that are slated for clearing include those that are home to the very wolves you have been seeing and may potentially be." Her words weighed heavily on Jonah's awakening in the ancestral area of the mother wolf who committed her young to you. He was deeply concerned that the logging would not only destroy the natural environment, but also break the delicate equilibrium that had drew the mysterious wolf and the cub to him as. Jonah's thoughts swirled with fear and incredulity as the news hit him. In the days that followed, he started to see more indications that something was wrong. He saw large machinery sitting on. Intimate discussions among local woodsmen and far-off logging roads suggested impending operations that could change the composition of the woodland drastically. Each new noise in the undergrowth and each distant rumble of engines made the once pristine wilderness that had served as both his haven and the cub's home appeared to quiver as his heart quickened, under the strain of upcoming change, but also maintaining the mystical bond he had sensed the growing wordless connection between himself and the wolf youngster. Late one evening, as he went out to see how the cub was doing, things became more complicated. When Jonah noticed a shadow coming quickly between the woods, he stopped, choked, and strained his. The mother wolf's eyes appeared in the weak light as she emerged from the darkness at the edge of the clearing. For a prolonged period of silence, eyes glowed with a brightness that combined caution and a distinct, age-old sadness. It appeared as though she was not only keeping an eye on her child, but also evaluating Jonah by measuring his. The wolf's unexpected and foreboding appearance highlighted his resolve and the sincerity of his concern. Because of the brittleness of the relationship that had developed in the days that followed, Jonah found it difficult to reconcile these two. On the one hand, the logging operations that are encroaching on the area have threatened to permanently harm the environment and break the bonds between humans and the wild. But the abrupt the mother wolf's ethereal apparition made him face a reality he had long avoided. His life was now deeply entwined with the forest's old rhythms, and that his destiny may be much more. Jonah started recording every detail in his journal as a result of the straightforward act of caring for a cub who was plagued by these ideas. He made notes about the mother wolf's eyes and the peculiar designs of the footprints he had noticed close to his hut and the odd noise of the machinery that now accompanied the forest's organic symphony. Each entry helped him better comprehend how human and wild forces beyond his control were convergent, threatened to upset the sacrosanct equilibrium he had grown to value. While news at a community gathering hosted at the rebuilt community center, other area residents learned about the upcoming logging. Rose is heard by town hall in heated argument with some locals who have long praised the forest as a component of their heritage and called for a re-examination of the logging permits, claiming that the forest was a living legacy that connected them to their ancestors and others, not just a resource for financial gain. Claimed that, with proper management, economic expansion and contemporary development could coexist with conservation. Appropriately, during this divisive discussion, Councilwoman Ramirez called for unity, saying that we must save our natural heritage and the vulnerable souls that rely on it. At his cabin, Jonah, we lose the forest and a piece of ourselves. Late at night, he would lie awake under a starless sky, struggling with his own feelings and experiencing the pull of the wilderness and the burden of his obligations at a single agonizing moment while holding the cub to him by. He muttered, "I want to keep you safe, little," as his fire died. But what will happen to all of us if the forest is destroyed? His voice was thick as the logging date drew near. The wind seemed to be blending with the gentle cries of faraway wolves with a sense of anxiety and longing. As emotions quickly increased, local news channels reported on the endangered woodland, and Sarah's research findings now connected the upcoming deforestation to a more significant trend of contempt for the environment in her most recent online piece. And shared extensively sparked a public uproar calling for prompt action to stop the tracking of social media, hashtags such. The community came together to support the trend of Save Our Forest, Protect Our Wild. Voices in an appeal for justice and preservation amid Jonah's internal conflict and these growing pressures reached its peak when the mother wolf's menacing footprints appeared, frantic warnings in his journal, all of which came together to reveal one indisputable fact: the cub's fate. Jonah's destiny and the health of the forest were now inseparable. Learned that he needed to actively fight for the wild survival with a great burden. He could no longer be a passive guardian. Heart and a resolute spirit, he made the decision to collaborate with nearby environmental activists to jointly plan. They planned forest walkouts and created petitions and nonviolent demonstrations to stop the logging permits. Participants would assemble beneath the old trees to honor the wild and declare their right to protect it. Its purity in the tense environment of growing challenges and urgent agitation, the enigmatic connection between humans. Thus the wolf assumed a mythical aspect, while the stray dogs remained modest. Presence acted as a continual reminder that a revolution may be sparked by even the slightest act of compassion. That might will preserve more than just a forest if it is nourished by love and unity. But the community's very spirit following the mystical revelations and the rising difficulties in Jonah's life started combining elements of the old law and the destiny community in unforeseen ways. When the woodland Jonah was threatened by the logging activities and the growing modernism, discovered that in addition to having an internal conflict over taking care of the cub, he was also drawn into a larger movement committed to preserving the untamed legacy that had unexpectedly taken on such a personal significance. One cold morning, as a gentle mist, Jonah received a neatly pinned message in the mail after rolling over in the jungle. The letter, written on old paper, was from Dr. Miriam Aldridge, a local folklorist, renowned for researching the region's historical traditions and narrating them in a kind, academic manner. Across many generations regarding the keepers of the wild, people selected by the natural spirits to preserve the harmony between nature and civilization. Your meeting with the mother wolf is not a coincidence. Stated, I think your ancestors were among those revered as guardians, and now it's an echo of an ancient covenant. Jonah heard her words for the first time with a mixture of wonder and apprehension as fate urges you to carry on that legacy. He started to think that his existence might be woven into a greater fabric, a fate that linked him to the old forest rhythms at the same time that the neighborhood started to mobilize at a community rally held in the renovated town hall in ways that shocked even the most doubtful locals. Hall, which had become a gathering place for activists and residents. Councilwoman Ramirez along. Several local activists have declared their intention to contest the logging permits that are endangering the forest. She fervently stated that this forest is the lifeline of our town and the home, and it is not just a place to harvest timber for profit. For the sake of our past, we must protect the place of legends and the haven for both gentle and wild species. In our future, her passionate and impassioned speech struck a deep chord with the audience, and shortly after, organizations were established to plan nonviolent demonstrations and petition the local authorities. Help bring attention to the significance of protecting the historic woodland at one of these lively gatherings. Jonah was asked to tell his story, and although he was first hesitant to take center stage, he soon understood that the community's battle and the forest's destiny were now entwined with the individual's journey in front of a wide range of activists, including young students, elders, and others. Jonah described the magical occurrences, the apparition of the mother wolf, the odd markings etched into old trees, and the cub's peculiar demeanor. I saw the wild calling every day when I watched that young child playing at the edge of the woods. He revealed his voice. His sincere statement, uttered with passion trembling, gives me hope that nature still remembers itself, brought the gathering together with unadulterated vulnerability, and gave the battle against the approaching. Jonah's commitment was put to the test by the deforestation back at his cabin life with the cub, which grew more and more autonomous, occasionally vanishing into the thick wilderness for hours at a time. When it came back, its eyes shone with a wild power that let Jonah realize the true nature of the wild during one Jonah was joined by Rebecca on a heartfelt afternoon as he observed the cub playing among the ferns in a sunny clearing, led the conservationist who initially alerted him to the logging intentions. I've witnessed numerous instances where nature finds. As she watched the playing cub, Rebecca said softly, I can also see the pain of a forest under siege. Jonah's struggle is a microcosm of the greater conflict we must wage in order to provide both. Her remarks, which were both urgent and comforting, gave him more resolve to find a way to give you and this forest a chance to flourish. Strike a balance between caring for the cub and preserving the wilderness at the same time. Olivia Reed and a small number of people were building new alliances inside the community. Weekly forest walks, a series of guided visits into the forest, were arranged by volunteers. Woodlands to teach locals about the value of conservation and the region's natural assets at one of. During these trips, Ms. Rivera, a local educator, talked impassionately to a group of teaching pupils about the fabled wolf guardians and the sacred responsibility of preserving the environment. She clarified that history is not only recorded in books, but also exists in the soul of the forest and in the core of every. Jonah's journey serves as a reminder to those who choose to care that sometimes the wild is where our greatest calling lies. The students' eyes were wide with wonder as they absorbed every word, and several of them left. The gathering motivated me to support regional conservation initiatives at home. Jonah's inner circle was likewise tense due to the pressure from the discoveries and the weight of. In the solitude of his hut, environmental organizations and his own contradictory feelings caused a daily fight. Would frequently find himself reading through his own journal entries and Dr. Aldridge's letters in an attempt to understand. I sensed the pull of the wild, whether he was destined to be a guardian of the wild or just a guy weighed down by fate. He wrote one night about a forest and the appeal of old voices. Yet I'm afraid that accepting this destiny could cost me I used to know these peaceful, uncomplicated moments of reflection that demonstrated the intensity of his internal conflict. An effort to balance his human. As the days got shorter, he had to balance his vulnerabilities with the daunting, almost mythic demands of his new role and the forest's interwoven lives of Jonah the cub, the mother wolf, and the first winter whispers. The historical legends, environmental dangers, and personal sacrifices all blended into a society that became increasingly close. A single, captivating story that promised to not just question the status quo, but also redefine what it meant to be a protector of the wild as the threat of deforestation increased and the winter winds grew stronger. When greater tensions in the forest community reached a fever pitch due to adjacent development, Jonah's internal conflict and the fate that appeared to have intertwined himself with the cubs and the wolf's ancient spirit was about to collide with the outside forces that posed a daily danger to the wild sanctuary's integrity. As the situation worsened, local officials talked about the large logging equipment they saw at the edge of the forest. Accelerated permits, and even the forest's organic rhythms appeared to shudder uneasily one chilly morning as Jonah was awakened by a disturbance close to his hut through the mist that coiled around the gnarled roots of old trees. He noticed the silhouettes of guys wearing hard hats and uniforms logging outside the frost-laden window. His heart fell when he saw the crews heading toward the center of the woodland with mechanical precision. These were not casual laborers, but a well-coordinated force ready to clear a piece of land that was precious to the local wildlife, as well as is said to be associated with the wolf spirit's old legacy, the idea of the forest as the very origin of. He felt a sense of dread that was almost overwhelming as the mysterious clues he had meticulously studied were destroyed. The divides within the community had reached a tipping point at a hastily summoned town, paralyzing the village adjacent. Hall gathering with locals, environmental activists, and even some skeptics. There was tension among the business owners, but Councilwoman Ramirez's passionate campaigning helped bring them together. In past meetings, a number of the locals took the stage, determined that despite their fatigue, our forest is more than merely a source of revenue, she said, her voice resonating off the empty conference hall walls. It is the old tales home and the live core of our heritage. If we allow it to be destroyed, we lose a piece of our own soul. Her remarks elicited both enthusiastic applause and doubtful mutterings. While many recognized the emotional bond with the wild, others were more focused on the financial ramifications of stopping the progress at his cabin. Jonas struggled with his own growing distress about the sudden appearance. He was reminded by the mother wolf's sad eyes, which were full of caution and hope, that his destiny was. Sitting by a tiny fire outdoors that night, he became entangled with the forest's fate. He opened his journal and scrolled over his anxieties in the wilderness while the cub slept peacefully by him in his cabin. Addresses me in urgent, age-old accents, but now with the threat of, with destruction on the horizon. I worry that our sacred duty and link may be permanently broken. As he struggled with the idea that defending the cub may require sacrificing the wild, his pen wavered over the paper. The internal struggle that had defined his freedom was agonizing if he could. What would happen to the mystical link he had made if he couldn't figure out a means to protect the forest? Midst of these internal conflicts, outside powers started to encroach in Sarah received an anonymous tip that caused shockwaves through the community. According to the report from a committed investigative journalist covering the saga, the logging permit was being expedited by a group of local authorities working together with a strong timber company, a move that would enable, regardless of public uproar, deforestation will start within days, according to Sarah. Her heart pounded as she pieced together the evidence, which included hushed talks, leaked documents, and encrypted emails. Captured by secret sources, the revelation was damning, implying the fight for the forest was a fight against corruption at the highest levels as well as an environmental concern. On the eve of darkness, a group of local environmentalists staged a demonstration outside of, armed with banners that said, "Protect our heritage and defend the wild." The vulnerable region marched solemnly. Through the streets, the demonstrators' voices formed a chorus of resistance against the impending destruction. We must allow greed to silence Olivia Reed, whose leadership was crucial in rallying community support. The spirit of the forest and her fervent cries resonated with each step the protesters took. Protest term became a focal point that brought together people who had long felt ignored by policies centered on growth, and those who, as the suspense reached its peak, Jonah treasured the old wild tale. Received a surprise guest one chilly, starless night as he was making his way back. He encountered a figure covered in shadows while out for a lonesome stroll in the woodland, and it was the same. He had previously met an elderly woman who had discussed ancient traditions and the spiritual connection between. Her eyes, now even more piercing in the darkness, were locked with his, both humans and wolves. When the moment arrived, Jonah spoke quietly but with unwavering authority. You have to choose between letting the wild be lost to ruthless greed or being the protector that the legends predicted. Her enigmatic yet stinging remarks resonated deeply within the man. The sound of distant protest crystallized the exact heart of his internal battle during that tense time. Together with the sound of approaching logging equipment and the rustle of the trees, every piece of proof, the legends that are whispered, the enigmatic stones, and an old emblem cut into oak bark, and the wolf's unbroken relationship came together to form an indisputable truth. The future of the cub, Jonah's fate, and the forest's very essence were now. The spiritual legacy of the wild is inextricably linked to the imminent conflict between nature and society. The stakes were bigger than ever before because of the unavoidable destructive forces of commerce and the threat of deforestation. When tensions in the community and inside the ancient forest reached a crisis point due to modern intrusion, Jonah's soul became so intense that the logging licenses were on the verge of being accepted by a local council that is influenced by business interests and the once balanced relationship between the wild and. Amidst this chaos, a direct attack on human beings had occurred, and a decisive. There was an impending conflict that would compel each individual to take sides and ultimately determine the course of events. A heated town hall in the middle of the forest on a cloudy morning, with the wind howling through the skeletal limbs of old pines. A meeting was held at the newly restored community center, where local residents and environmental Councilwoman Ramirez, activists, business owners, and even some dubious authorities, who had long served as a guiding light for those who supported protecting the environment, took the stage with determination. "Our forest is not just a resource to be exploited," she said, her voice seeming to flame through the cold air. "It is the core of our tradition, rising above the cries of disapproval. Real, breathing evidence of our predecessors' legacy and the essence of the." According to a local timber, "We cannot allow short-sighted economic gains to destroy something so sacred." Mr. Clayton Rose, a company representative, responded to her passionate plea by wearing a dapper suit and equipped with economic revival promises and statistics. He argued, "While we all cherish the beauty, progress in nature is unavoidable, and our town requires economic expansion, new jobs, and updated infrastructure. Although the proposed logging project is intended to assist our community, we must have a realistic outlook on the future." Ramirez's passion clashed with a measured tone, and the audience burst into a clamor of voices, some supporting. Among the verbal altercations, development others defended the crazy legacy. Jonah was sitting calmly in a corner, staring at the gathering. The argument wasn't. He saw every argument for the logging project as a matter of survival, not merely a theoretical policy discussion. Seemed to threaten the hallowed forest that had selected him as its improbable guardian. As the heated arguments went on, a teenage activist started yelling. With her eyes flashing with outrage, she demanded to know how you can defend raising the trees that have protected our ancestors and fostered the wolf's very spirit if the forest is destroyed. Outside the meeting hall, tensions erupted into street groups, "And you are ruining our past and our future." Several demonstrators with signs that read, "Protect our forest," gathered close to Jonah's cabin and the logging site. Social internet was ablaze with live footage of the event and Guardians of the Wild Unite. The community saw hashtags like Chuck Forest Guardians and Chuck Save the Wild trend, indicating that the demonstration wasn't merely a response to the deterioration of the environment. It was a proclamation that the community would not remain passive while there. As the argument heated up inside the town hall, cultural and natural heritage was in danger. Councilwoman Ramirez made the audacious suggestion that we create a citizen task. She insisted that we cooperate with the local government and the wood firm, must put in place explicit, legally binding policies to safeguard important forest regions while permitting sustainable. We must balance growth in a responsible way because we owe it to our children and the spirits of our land. Her suggestion, which balanced preservation and advancement, elicited conflicting responses. Some business owners grimaced at what they described as foolish, while others nodded cautiously in agreement. At that crucial juncture, sentimentalism brought up memories of Jonah's miraculous meeting with the mother wolf. Given the enigmatic markings that had sealed his destiny, the memory sparked an unwavering resolve. He got up from his chair and moved to the front of the room, meeting the crowd's eyes. "I am no ordinary man," he said in an emotionally charged voice. "Selected by the wild and given a responsibility that goes beyond politics and business. The forest serves as more than just a setting for our existence. It is our essence and our legacy. If we let it be destroyed, we lose a piece of ourselves that will never be regained." His remarks struck a chord because they were honest and sincere. For many people, his declaration was a call to action that embodied the spirit of the wild. Preserve not only the trees, but also the tradition of kindness and kinship that they represented. As the whispers of agreement turned into applause, and Mr. Clayton's self-assured demeanor started to cause the timber company to fall apart. The community's combined resolve cornered the representative in a last-ditch effort to reclaim control. He made an effort to write off Jonah's passionate plea as an exception, a simple, "This is an emotional outburst that has no real impact on economic realities." But he responded to one man's comment, but his tone wavered under the combined weight of all the voices speaking at once. Sarah received an alarming message on her phone after her most recent research revealed compelling proof of corrupt practices and backroad dealings concerning the logging permits, which she shared with. The evidence showed that Councilwoman Ramirez and the task team immediately incited neighborhood members to express outrage. That some officials conspired with the forestry firm to expedite the logging process while disregarding environmental laws and public uproar. The revelation sparked a new round of demonstrations in which people demanded responsibility and openness during the contentious exchange. Olivia Reed, the leader of community engagement, took the initiative and declared, "We must not let greed silence our voices. This is about conserving our history and culture, not just about protecting trees." Her passionate speech brought everyone in the room together, including those who had previously influenced by the prospect of economic expansion. They started to reevaluate previous stances. As the meeting came to an end, a tenuous agreement was reached, and the task force boasted, due to the indisputable proof of corruption and the passionate appeals of the community, determined to strive for a well-rounded approach that would preserve important forest regions, respect the long-standing connection to nature, and permit sustainable, transparent development. Was a necessary compromise, one that honored the timeless essence of the wild outside, while acknowledging the complexity of modern life. Jonah stepped out onto his cabin's porch as the last of the daylight turned to twilight, yet the woodland. The cub played softly at his feet as the machines that were encroaching on it continued to whisper its old secrets. Jonah understood at that moment, with the sound of a united community reverberating in his heart, that the fight for the jungle and for his own fate, the conflict had only just started. Not over, but the people's determination had been strengthened in the crucible of that pivotal time, as the initial indications of the logging company's permits threatened to permanently alter the landscape every time winter infiltrated the forest. Jonah's life and the ancient woods came together in a single, intensely tense moment during the community's battle. At the brink of a decision, Jonah trembled as the supernatural signs and his internal conflict reached a crescendo that would decide not just his destiny, but also the forest's fundamental essence. Jonah found himself on a chilly evening as nightfall gave way to a sharp chill and a thin layer of frost covered the ground. The atmosphere was charged with tension at the entrance to his cabin, and an eerie silence had descended. Woodland, as though the natural world itself were holding its breath. The otherwise timeless melody was broken by the unmistakable hum of heavy machinery and the deep rumble of logging trucks. Jonah's nerves were jangled by every noise in the outdoors, and he was afraid that the ancient GED's resolve within the cabin would soon tear hallowed woods apart. There was a noticeable sense of anxiety as Jonah sat at a worn wooden table with his journal open in front of him, each page full of hastily written descriptions of the crescent and weak symbols etched into the enigmatic stones that are ancient oaks. His heart raced as he remembered how it glinted in the moonlight and the mother wolf's ghostly presence. When the elderly woman who had mentioned destiny and old packs paid him a chilly visit, her words reverberated in his. Keep in mind that you have to choose between becoming the protector that the legends predicted and allowing the wild to disappear due to greed. At the same time, that decision weighed him down like the deep snow outside. The forest itself appeared to protest outside Jonah's cottage as a strong wind swept through the trees, scattering the leaves, making the tall pines in the clearing close to his house, where the logging crews had started to set, tremble menacingly. Equipment, some local activists and conservationists had assembled, their faces grim with determined. They gathered around a makeshift campfire and informed the councilwoman about their last-minute meetings. Environmental organizations sent Ramirez an urgent notes requesting that the logging be stopped right after during one. Olivia Reed, a fervent community outreach leader, had a heated argument close to the logging site, spoke to the gathered audience, saying, "This community's forest is its lifeblood." Her breath was audible as she shouted, and every twig and ruffle in the chilly air could be seen. "Our common heritage includes underbrush. If it disappears, we also lose more." Her words, which were born on the wind, blended with nature, and we lose our identity. The mechanical clatter of heavy machinery and the distant sound of chainsaws intensify the sensation of impending crisis at his cabin. Jonah's internal conflict peaked as the logging date approached. He struggled to decide whether to defend the cub by protecting the ecosystem and the necessity of respecting the spiritual connection formed with the mother wolf. The chilly air pricked his cheeks when he went outdoors that evening holding the cub, and the cub sensed the. Jonah stared up at the seriousness of the moment as its eyes reflected trust and a natural wildness. In a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper, he declared, "I will not allow them to destroy what is sacred. Be the steward of this forest of our legacy." At that exact instant, a sequence of terrible incidents transpired that shocked the entire community. The news was released online by an adventurous investigative journalist whose reports had documented every turn of Jonah's journey. The conspiracy between the logging company and local politicians was exposed by leaked papers. How permissions were expedited by dishonest methods, with rumors of bribery and pressure even making the rounds. Those who were previously trusted to safeguard the environment were immediately engulfed in social media's digital maelstrom, trended around the region with appeals to action and hashtags like Guardian of the Wild and Save Our Forest. Jonah's haunting anonymous threat was now a powerful rallying cry for Town Hall Councilwoman Ramirez. Supported by the proof presented by Sarah and a group of campaigners, stated that the logging, "We cannot watch helplessly as our natural heritage is sold off to the highest bidders, even if permits are challenged in court." She declared, bitter, her voice quivering with rage and hope as her live address inspired. As the community rallied, Jonah came across the mother and supporters from both inside and beyond the neighborhood. Wolf one last time on a beautiful night while he patrolled with a small group of people close to the forest border. For a brief, suspended moment, volunteers' eyes caught sight of her figure against the glittering snow. Encountered a quiet conversation that was full of significance in that little moment. Jonah felt a courage and a profound sense of security. The mother wolf looked at both stern and gentle, seems to recognize his promise to save the wild. It was a time of human connection, and nature solidifying Jonah's determination within his cabin with the reverberation of protests in the distance and the thunder of. With logging trucks in the background, Jonah wrote his last journal post. He wrote about his optimism, his dread, and his resolve to fulfill the role of guardian predicted by the old traditions. "I chose to stand for this tonight in the face of 1,000 whispered promises and the icy glare of oncoming change. I chose to preserve the precious connection between our hearts and the ancient by becoming wild." His words, "Spirit of these woods," reverberated with a force that promised change as the hours passed. Just prior to the crucial logging process, the strain was almost intolerable with each heartbeat. A community united by a common destiny was demonstrated by the silent prayer. The scene was now. The forces of contemporary greed would clash with the timeless guardianship in a last confrontation. Jonah's fate and the cub's future in that crucible of uncertainty and hope. And the spirit of the forest were together at one pivotal moment on a chilly night as the first. The ancient forest grew darker with the approach of winter, and Jonah heard the menacing roar of logging machines in the distance. The prospect of the lengthy logging operation made my heart race like a drum of destiny. As predicted by Councilwoman Ramirez and feared by many residents, the logging firm was at a turning point, scheduled to start cutting a vital section of the forest, the very location where the ancient legends were supposed to live and where. The night the mother wolf and her youngster formed their sacred bond, the forest appeared to hold its breath. Jonah, holding the cub tightly in his arms, left his cabin and entered a world that was both. Heavy machinery could be heard in the background, eerily silent and packed with urgency. The air was sharp and biting, and there was a low mechanical hum that became louder by the minute. Gust of wind rustling the foliage as though warning of the impending chaos. He was aware that if the trees toppled, the supernatural connection that had started to heal his spirit was accompanied by ancient symbols engraved in their bark. At the same time, hundreds of locals had gathered in the clearing close to the old forest edge. For a final demonstration, environmental activists and even some local officials had assembled with banners that said "Protect." Councilwoman Ramirez's voice was resolute as she waved our precious woodland and the guardians of the wild together in the icy air. Stood on an improvised stage in front of the throng, saying, "Tonight, we stand as one. This forest is our heritage," she said in a tone that was both defiant and hopeful. "We will not allow corruption and greed to destroy the legacy of our ancestors and the wild spirit." Jonah's mind was roiling with mixed feelings of terror back at his cabin, tenacity, and an intense sense of duty as the logging trucks. Jonah felt the weight of them as they moved down the forest road, their headlights piercing the darkness. He remembered the vision of the mother wolf's serious gaze and the enigmatic symbols surrounded by old oaks. When the murmured tales of a protector selected by the wild, each of these recollections solidified into a single. He had to respond immediately to the protest outside, not only for the cubs' benefit, but also for the forest's future. Grew into a cacophony of passionate yelling and conflicting catchphrases when Jonah emerged onto his cabin's veranda. Watching the far-off figures of logging crews maneuvering heavy equipment into the cold pricked his cheeks. Standing at the border of the woodland, the forest appeared to be crying alow. His heart ached with grief and resolve all at once as a melancholy melody continued on the wind, as if the mother wolf, called forth by fate, emerged at the edge of the clearing, her silver eyes displaying both caution and foreign eternity. Jonah's heartbeat was connected with the wisdom of the old world. It seemed as though the nature itself was begging him in that quiet interaction. Keep the wolf's presence safe and honor the trust that has been placed in you. Jonah's resolve was strengthened by both Il and commanding. He realized at that moment that he must take on the role of protector, as the ancient legends promised a bridge between the nature and humans, maintaining the ancient equilibrium. Sarah's investigative report, now supported by damning proof of unethical backroom agreements, was crucial at that point. Once quickly authorized logging permits when available online, the news quickly went viral, bringing the community together in the hashtags Guardian of the Wild and Digital Outcry went viral on social media. And CHSAR Woodland, as local news outlets televised the demonstration and the imminent danger in real time. The combined power of public outrage and indisputable proof compelled local authorities to reevaluate their stance, as Councilwoman Ramirez stands at the podium in the midst of the uproar announced that the logging permits would be put on hold while an impartial review was conducted in the middle of this chaos. Jonah emerged from the group of people gathered close to his cabin, the cub by his side, and he raised his voice, the chill of the night imprinted on his cheeks. I have lived on the periphery for so long, burdened by, he declared, loneliness and forgetfulness by a world that no longer values nature. Despite his emotional tremor, his speech remained calm, but today I stand as a protector of this holy place and guardian of the wild. I will not allow those who simply want to harm our legacy to. Our strength is in our connection to nature, and we must strive for it with each breath we take. The crowd's applause and chants of solidarity were echoed by passionate remarks made in the chilly night air, erupted from all over the clearing as the locals united behind him, cheering the logging truck's roar, was suddenly overpowered by the people's combined will. The ancient forest was silhouetted against the starless sky in that pivotal moment, and the rebellious eyes of the rising upon him. Jonah realized that the war for the forest was now a fight for all souls, not just his own. Felt that the sanctity of life and the eternal force of nature were the first. As the first rays of daylight broke through the gloomy horizon, the demonstration became a symbol of resistance and solidarity. At least temporarily, logging operations were stopped, and the dishonest transactions revealed by Sarah's report triggered a series of legal. But in the silent aftermath, as the neighborhood came together to commemorate their arduous victory, Jonah gazed out at the forest with a feeling of direction and optimism that the guardian had been selected and would fulfill his responsibility as dawn broke. A new day dawned over the ancient forest, promising optimism and a fresh start to the previous week's events, defined by intense conflict against forces that sought to destroy a sacred site, mystical encounters, and personal sacrifices. Heritage settled into a transformational, peaceful Jonah, who was once a lone man traveling the boundaries of the wild stood guard, his destiny inextricably linked to the forest's soul and the relationship he had with the cub that a mother wolf had given him following the pivotal encounter. After the logging permits were expedited, the community came together with a renewed sense of unity. Corrupt transactions were halted, while Councilwoman Ramirez conducted an impartial assessment. and the citizen task force persisted in their unrelenting efforts to guarantee that the forest and the old symbols engraved, the demonstrations that formerly occupied the space, would be maintained for future generations by being buried in its venerable trees. Streets dotted with impassioned messages and heartfelt testimonials have been replaced by positive interactions between environmental campaigners and local officials. Together, entrepreneurs created a vision for sustainable growth that honored the country and its inhabitants by striking a balance between economic development and the protection of the wild. For Jonah, his inward journey had been just as significant as the public conflict in the quiet moments. Following the altercation, he sat as the cub played at his feet on his cabin's old porch. He thought back on the amazing sequence of events that had brought him to this moment when he recalled the evening that the mother wolf, whose eyes were full of age-old wisdom, had trusted her cub to him in a quiet yet impactful gesture that transformed his life, which he documented in his journal. Moment as the start of metamorphosis or a calling to become more than a wild animal caretaker, but a link between the natural world and the human world. Each symbol, Dr. Aldridge's whispered narrative, and each encounter with local naturalists had gradually constructed the belief that the cub's destiny was woven into a larger, timeless tapestry, developed into its untamed nature. Yet its eyes showed signs of mild taming, which was a result of the care it had received from Jonah and the neighborhood. Their relationship is a delicate combination of instinct and Jonah had learned from love that genuine guardianship required honoring his charge's wild character while providing safety and affection in those moments spent together on treks in the forest and peaceful evenings by the fire. Jonah found that he was committed to maintaining the equilibrium between the two, and that his position was one of stewardship rather than control. This story had a significant impact on the community's untamed and civilized neighbors. After seeing wildlife as remote and distinct, people started to view the forest as a living, breathing thing and a cultural legacy. Precious local schools launched environmental education initiatives based on wolf stories. Elders participated in storytelling sessions organized by guardians and community centers, told the region's rich tradition, and the story of Jonah's cub and mother wolf became a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Serve as a reminder that even in the present day, historic ties and human hearts could be guided by the spirit of the wild. As the judicial investigations at a festive gathering, Councilwoman Ramirez spoke to the community about the ongoing corruption in logging. Speaking today in the recently constructed cultural center, she declared resolutely that we respect our history and safeguard our forest, our legends, our future, and our collective spirit have overcome fear and greed. The crowd was inspired by her comments, and victory serves as a reminder that when we unite, no force can quiet nature's call. Before you go, a chorus of voices united in hope burst into sincere applause. If Jonah's experience has impacted you, we encourage you to join this movement of hope and guardianship. Enchanting connection between a wolf and a human, and the ability of a society to unite in preserving its legacy. Kindly subscribe to. Please hit the like button on our channel and leave a comment below with your opinions. How you think nature and people might live in harmony, and relate your personal experiences of surprising relationships that have transformed your life. And don't forget to view our upcoming video, in which we examine how such networks exist globally, are building sustainable futures by embracing old traditions. Thank you for observing, and until the next time, continue to be wild, compassionate, and never forget that every act of kindness has the potential to be the beginning of a revolution.